Hello and welcome to Pulse, your podcast delving into all things health, innovation, digital and data. Proudly brought to you by Pulse IT News. I'm your host, Louise Shaper.
And I'm George Margellis, your other host.
George, it's always lovely to see you. What have you been up to lately?
Look, it's been a pretty quiet fortnight over here in Sydney. The weather's become quite cold, but luckily it's not raining. And as I'm preparing for an overseas trip, we've been keeping fairly busy with that. But we did have the Shaping the Future of Aged Care conference last week. The problem with that, of course, was the date of the changes have been changed. So the conference was supposed to be after the so that sort of was a bit of an anticlimax. But nevertheless, there was a good panel session that I was involved with. And we had both Emma Cook from the department and Siobhan McFadden from ADHA joining the panel. So we had quite a robust discussion about the need for interoperability and data transfer. So that was good.
What was the mood like at the conference with, all these changes pending?
So everyone was fairly relieved that the changes have been postponed, although there was a degree of frustration by the fact that it was changed relatively late. So people were working towards a certain date. Now they've got 4 more months to do it, so that's made life a little bit easier, but it also means they have to continue running the status quo for 4 months. So it's a bit of a quagmire.
Yeah, okay, well.
The other thing I did over here, I went for my annual blood test.
Ooh, do tell?
And alas, again, the lab that I go to did not upload my report to My Health Record.
Oh, no.
Even though they had a box on the record saying, do not upload to My Health Record. And again, I highlighted to them, no, is there a separate box to please upload to My Health Record? But alas, I had the blood test 4 days ago. I've logged on to My Health Record a couple of times. Nothing's there. And it's actually, I can understand the frustration people have because it's quite inconvenient. So now, even though I'm a medical doctor myself and technically I can access the results if I wanted to go through the back door, I do the right thing and I go through my GP. So I have a GP who looks after me. Unfortunately, my GP is on holidays at the moment. So I can't contact him and say, okay, I'm going to pop in and see my results. And he gets back from holidays after I leave. So my results are sitting in the ether there somewhere waiting for me to review them. Hopefully, I did sneakily put in my own name as a copy of the results to me. So hopefully they will send me a copy of the results before I leave. So I'll know what happens. But
see if that works.
But it's just, that frustration of, these results can now be sitting in abeyance for 5 or 6 weeks because of the mere fact that they're not uploaded to My Health Record and I could have looked at them and if there was something of concern, I would have escalated it as required.
Yeah. You could have acted on it before you go on holidays. Yeah. All right. Well, we won't call out your pathology provider name, but you know who you are and you got to do better.
If they do it again.
All right. Then we're going to name and shame. Okay.
We've given fair warning.
Oh, no. Well, geez.
How about you, Louise? Your week's obviously been fairly hectic.
I have some news that I will share towards the end of the episode that you're aware about, George. But in this segment, I thought I would tell you a funny story. So I've been spending a fair bit of time with family of late. And on the weekend, I was with my cousin and she was telling me about her grandparents who had died in recent years because we're just talking about health stuff. And anyway, and she was telling me her grandfather, he was 96 years old and his wife had been unwell for quite some time. And apparently she was a hypochondriac. So he was always driving her to the doctor and the hospital for every minor thing. Anyway, and he wasn't feeling well. I'm not sure the symptoms. My cousin wasn't across them, but for whatever reason, he thought he should go to hospital and get this thing checked out. Anyway, it turns out that he had cancer and didn't have long left. So he's no longer with us. But the funny story is he was 96 years old and he's at the hospital and they're like, all right, what's the name of your GP? Oh, I don't have a GP. Well, you must have seen, one, maybe not a regular GP, but when was the last GP you saw? I've never seen a GP. 96 years old.
Wow.
Never seen a GP. And then they're thinking, oh, okay, well, that's probably not right, but oh well. Next question, what medicines are you on? He's 96 years old. You figure there's going to be a few medicines.
It's going to be something there, yeah.
Never taken medicine. I don't even take Panadol. I don't want to get addicted. Anyway, this man, apparently it's a true family story. At 96, cancer finally got the better of him. But until then, never saw a GP, never went to hospital, never took any sort of medication. So I was just saying to my cousin, I hope you got his genes because some good longevity genes there.
That is definitely an example of great genes. It's interesting because as I'm doing more work now in that aged care sector, we often find that the more you look for things, the more you're likely to find things. And the reality is some of these things you can't change the course of. So the fact that he found out at 96, a couple of weeks before he passed away, that he had cancer, had he been diagnosed 5 years earlier, he just would have lived 5 years knowing he had cancer. Not necessarily made a difference. So
Yeah.
it does remind me of, I remember when I was a doctor at the hospital and I had a 93-year-old turn up. And similar type thing, pretty healthy. Had a bit of a heart murmur coming in and they were checking a few things. Anyway, one of the young junior doctors was reading him the riot act because he was smoking at 93. And I sort of went, well, I can understand we technically have to do that, but we should put some of these things in context. And that sounds like, for your great uncle, quite a good end-of-life experience compared to what it could have been.
Yeah, apparently he did. So anyway, but I thought that was funny. He's never seen a GP.
You have some of his genes as well.
Well, I hope they went into the family and I've got some good markers in there. All right. Well, shall we get to our hot topics, George?
Let's go with it.
Okay, well, we've talked before about the big tech making serious plays in the healthcare space. Well, Amazon has now made a new move and they're out for blood. They are launching an at-home blood testing kit and they're starting with the Indian market, which is interesting. They've been developing and delivering health services in the US market, Amazon, for a long time now. Telehealth, primary care clinics with One Medical, online pharmacy. They've acquired PillPack. They've actually registered the name Amazon Pharmacy in Australia ages ago, but now they're getting into diagnostics. Now, of course, regulation is different depending on which country you reside, but Amazon are undeniable leaders in logistics, speed, customer experience, and once they come into your market, they present a challenge to startups and the incumbent players. And George, I often think we're living in the future. And now we see another example of this with the doctor office moving to our back pockets on our phones, even more so. What are your thoughts on this one?
I have to admit, Amazon never ceases to amaze me. I can order cat food at 8 p.m. on a Sunday night, and it's at my doorstep by midday the next day. And our cat and Mush is really appreciative of that. So it's really quite amazing. I mean, and I remember, look, a couple of years ago, I was in Canada running around the States on a business trip. I had left my watch charger. It was a Pebble watch, so it wasn't a sort of standard off-the-shelf watch. I'd left my watch charger at home and I thought, oh, here it goes, I'm going to run out of it. I ordered it on Amazon late afternoon and it was at the hotel the next morning. So they actually have logistics down pat. Yeah, I've got to give them credit for that. And as I commented earlier, currently pathology testing doesn't have that sort of logistical capability. So if they can bring that skill into the logistics of diagnostics, I think it's great. Blood tests are now quite standardized if we can make that process better. However, just getting your blood tests without understanding the results is a big issue. So I think we need to make sure that there is a degree of clinical governance around it so that when people get the results, they're explained well, the doctors brought in, and they do have, even if it's a telehealth consult through One Medical, some way of doing those results. And it made me think about pathology results because when you get pathology results, all you get is a bunch of numbers on a page.
Yes. No pretty graphs. There's no colours. It's not very user-friendly.
And it's interesting because back in 2010, Wired magazine published an article called The Blood Test Gets a Makeover. And I sent you through a link. We should share that with our friends online. But essentially, it took a standard pathology result and made it suitable for a layperson to understand. Now, that's great from that perspective, but even I, as a trained clinician, got a heap more value out of that report than I do out of the current report where I have to look at a row of numbers and work out what the trend is. So they claim they can come within 6 hours of your requesting a blood test to come to your home and do it. I don't know about you. Last time I was in India, it took me an hour to get from one block to the next. So I take my hat off to the guys who can do this in that sort of place. Putting all these things together and turning it into an end solution, a great innovation, obviously a challenge to the existing marketplace, but hey, that's the innovator's dilemma as we keep on talking about.
Yes, that's right. Well, I'm speaking at the Pharmaceutical Society of Australia's conference next week, so I'll work out whether I want to put this into my speech and whether I'm going to have tomatoes thrown at me for suggesting that Amazon might dare interrupt this market. For those of us not in India, you could think, oh, well, why is this relevant? That's happening in India. But what's relevant is why would they be going into a market that size, the scale? Like that's going to be a real test for their logistics, and they are brilliant at it. It is something that's why they made big losses for such an extended period of time. Because they were building up there, we're going to own the entire supply chain here. And if they master that for a market the size of India, that's also got levels of chaos, let's say, embedded into it with logistics, then developing that for other markets, including the US, Australia, the UK, others, that would be pretty easy. So it's something that I wonder how much regulators are paying attention to these moves with new players in the market, because it's going to be coming.
The price points are obviously relative to India, but they were very reasonable. So, I mean, when you look at pathology costs in Australia, I mean, most of them are covered by Medicare, a significant chunk of money. But I think also that ability to integrate it into a platform so that the information is available. Not to say pathology results in Australia are fairly accessible if you're a clinician. I have to give a credit where it's due. So our friends at HL7 and that have done quite a lot of work in that space. So getting pathology results, but getting them done in 6 hours at your home, especially when you start looking at more complex markets of people with hospital in the home or elderly at home, I think it's a real game changer.
Yeah. So we'll be paying attention to that and see how long it takes Amazon to introduce that service to other markets. Thank you, George. All right, now over to the UK. And I shared in a recent episode that I had a Pronovo full body MRI scan. Well, in England, UK Biobank have completed the world's biggest human imaging project. They've scanned the bodies of 100,000 people. The study has been going for 11 years, and now the anonymised data from the volunteers is available to researchers from around the world to study disease identification, prevention, and treatment. Now, I believe the UK Biobank is one of the largest collections of biological samples and health data in the world. They've got data in that bank from over 500,000 people, and then they selected 100,000 of that 500,000 to participate in the full body scan part of the data collection. Now, of course, they're using AI to analyse the data, and a researcher was quoted in the BBC that covered this story, and they said that to analyse all of these scans manually would have taken thousands of years, but now they're using AI and they can extract the data in a matter of minutes. And the fact that researchers can get access to this data, like amazing development, and good on you, Biobank.
Absolutely. Look, it's an amazing development. Like, big data just keeps on getting bigger. And this is a great example of how a public service does what it does best. It takes that data and democratizes it. So that information now is available to researchers across the UK and across the world with the various provisos around it. But that information will lead to incredible knowledge resources going forward. So big kudos to the UK Biobank and the initiative. The other interesting thing, of course, is the Biobank has more than just imaging data. It also has DNA samples, it has blood, urine and saliva samples, it has medical history. It's a bioinformatician's dream come true as far as the information goes. And just imagine if My Health Record could also capture some of that information and we made it available for research. We could probably have a couple more Nobel Prizes here in Australia come our way.
Well, we'd love to see that happen. We've got fabulous researchers here. They just need some funding and access to the data. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, we've had discussions about the secondary uses of data. With the right consent model, and 500,000 people in the UK have consented, with the right security controls, I think this is a valuable source of information that we can really leverage.
Yeah, and it's a great point, George. Back in the day with the Blue Button initiative in the US, which was the idea that Department of Veterans Affairs, I think if your medical record was stored with them, there was literally a blue button and you could download your record and I think you get like a CSV type file. But anyway, that was a while ago. But as part of that, Regina Halliday and a bunch of other people were trying to implement what they called the Rainbow Button Initiative, which would be when at the point of your data being collected, each colour would represent a different type of use for your data, and you could give consent at the time for how you're happy to have your data used. And we often hear that people rightly have privacy concerns, and I completely understand that. But, you know, the scans alone, that was a 5-hour appointment. Like it was like your day was spent there. And that's not all the other types of data they've collected from you over the time. And yet people are really happy to have their data collected and used for the benefit of humanity and other people. So I think that's, you know, something that we're really an underutilized resource. So I'd love to see consent models get to a point where, you know, whoever's collecting my data, I can actually give consent and say, hey, I'm happy for it to be used for research purposes.
Here in Australia, we do have the 40 Up studies a lot of people have opted into, but it doesn't capture that wealth of information. I mean, the fact that we can now correlate, you know, DNA data with imaging data, with pathology data, with medical history data, and follow someone across a lifespan is a real opportunity. So I'll be watching that with great interest.
Yes. All right. Well done, UK Biobank. All right, now we discussed in the last show, George, the UK's 10-year health plan, which includes plans to use wearables to keep people healthy. Well, meanwhile, in the US, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy has said publicly that he wants every American using a wearable health device within 4 years. So is this trend finally going to catch on? The last episode, we talked about the regulation of AI scribes in the UK market and the impact of that, especially potentially globally. Well, in the US, consumer health wearable company Whoop, and many of our Pulse Buddies will be fans of Whoop, they have gotten in trouble. They've received a warning letter from the FDA that they've crossed a line with their blood pressure insight tool. They say that it is an unapproved medical device. Now, Whoop are pushing back. They're saying it's actually a wellness insight. And the CEO of Whoop has been very public, saying this is bureaucracy gone mad and is pushing back on the FDA. Now, this is all playing out right now. FDA, as we're recording, have given Whoop 7 days to respond to this letter. So we'll see where we are at with this story in time. But it made me think that we are increasingly going to see the blurring of lines between consumer health wearables and medical devices that diagnose and give advice. And this has impacts for startups, obviously, for clinicians, for us as consumers. So, George, what do you think of this wellness tech and prevent tech industry's ability to infiltrate the healthcare sector and our systems?
You have to love the United States, don't you? So they're bringing in a policy where everyone in the United States can have a wearable. But at the moment, no, they all can't get measles vaccine. So they have other challenges. So I guess putting everything into context is important. But it's a bit of a quandary in that thinking that by just giving them wearables, we're going to solve a problem. First of all, I'm a big fan of wearables. I've got 2 drawers almost full of various devices that I've bought over the years, starting off with the original Fitbits back in 2010, the little clip-on things. And there's been some fantastic devices. And I've had half a dozen different smartwatches and a half a different smart bands. I've tried a whole bunch of kit caboodles. Obviously, if they worked as well as everyone said they would be, I would now be a lot thinner and look a lot younger. So they probably don't work by themselves in solo. They're definitely not a silver bullet. So just thinking that wearables will solve the American healthcare problems, that's probably a long stretch. But using them to enable consumers to play a more active role in their own healthcare is important. But of course, that's more than one thing required to do it. You need some education, you need some incentives, you need a system that supports it. Back in my old days at Intel, we were talking then about, a day in the life of a GP, how that would change with technology. And one of the key things was the doctor would be incentivized to keep track of people's wellness using these various devices remotely, not relying on them coming in and giving their results, but actually having them on some sort of monitoring system so they could pick up changes in activity. So the technology is a great enabler for new models. We need to think much more carefully about what those models of care are and how we both pay for them, but also how we utilize them. And that's going to require us to do some research. The other thing, and as the Whoop thing points out, we need to make sure that these devices are accurate and reliable. I mean, there's a plethora of them around now. And you can find a smartwatch from $19.95 to $1,995. So there's a plethora of them out there. And following on one of our conversations we had a couple of sessions ago, I actually went out and bought myself a new smartwatch, one of the new Samsung Watch 7s, because we talked about how it can track sleep apnea and it can track a whole bunch of other things. And it's amazing the amount of data it gathers. The downside is that I have to recharge it every day, and that's a real pain for me. I can imagine for other people that would be much more inconvenient. So there's that trade-off. Whereas the old smartwatch I had, which was an Amazfit from Huawei, had like an 8 or 9 day battery life.
Oh, you're kidding. Wow. I've never had a wearable that lasts so long.
So the question would be, how do you trade off what the devices capture versus the practicality? I mean, I remember we did a couple of projects over the years trying to get older people to wear smartwatches. And the reality is the regular recharging and calibrating is a challenge. But I think it's really a good step forward. I mean, the fact that they're recognizing that these are potentially a clinical tool, they're putting in the rules around to making sure they're reliable and validated. But I think it goes back to what our good old friend Chris Longhurst, when he said standardizing data practices and incentivizing providers through value-based reimbursement tied to digital health outcomes. That's the big picture. The wearables are part of that big picture.
Yes, absolutely. And we will be, I think, increasingly moving towards that. And there's so many people working on it. I think for the startups now. So if you're working for a relatively young startup, you're going to be in trouble, I think, because if the FDA and other bodies, like in the UK market as well, are insisting on regulation as a starting point, then, that's fine. But that costs money. There's time and expense. Some of those things you can spend, depending on the nature of your device, huge sums of money, like millions of dollars, and a huge amount of time before you can even go to market if you need approval. I know a lot of even established vendors in Australia who have certain features in their products that are used in the Australian healthcare system that aren't available in Australia. There's some features are only available in the US because they're not yet approved for use here. So if you're a young startup, you're going to need to raise more capital to cover the costs of going through this regulatory process, which is not insignificant, which puts larger and more established players, they'll have a financial edge and will be able to retain their market share. So I think that's going to be one of the impacts of these things as well.
True. I mean, there will be a challenge for people to think about, do I start up with a device or do I start up with a solution which utilizes a device? So again, we're going to have parallel markets coming into play. But you're right. I mean, there's pros and cons for high regulation. I mean, we saw Theranos where the regulation wasn't quite up to speed. So there are flaws in place. But at the end of the day, people need to think about how they combine these into a solution, not just a shiny device that does something.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to move now to OpenEvidence. And I believe you're a fan of OpenEvidence, George. I have not used it myself, but yes, you're nodding.
I am a big fan, definitely.
All right. Well, OpenEvidence, for those of you who haven't heard of them, they promote themselves as the leading medical information platform. It's reportedly used by 40%, so almost half of US doctors, this AI platform that brings together medical information and research from reputable sources and distills that information to make it more accessible and actionable by clinicians and researchers. So sort of think of it as like ChatGPT for doctors. Now, it's currently free to use. It makes money from ads, just like Google does. But OpenEvidence has been in the news for two reasons. Firstly, they announced a $210 million US raise and a valuation of $3.5 billion. Now, when we're talking startups and raises, I know we get quite immune to these large numbers. It's like, oh yeah, whatever. But so 210 mil raise, valuation of 3.5 billion. The thing that makes this really special, this company was only founded 3 years ago. Think about what you were doing 3 years ago and what you're doing now. Probably most of us have not founded a multi-billion-dollar company in the last 3 years. So that's been in the news. But then they've also been in the news, and this is less of a prominent story, but I think an important one, because of the presence of gender bias in the information it serves up. Now, Joanna Strober, who's the founder of femtech company Monash Health in the US, she's been rightly critical of OpenEvidence. And I quote her, "They have regurgitated one of the biggest screw-ups in modern medicine, that HRT, hormone replacement therapy, causes cancer." Now, the study that reported this causal link has been thoroughly debunked a long time ago, but OpenEvidence didn't seem to know this. So there's lots of different aspects of this story, George, but I'll just put on my feminist hat for a moment and say, on behalf of all women, we're sort of tired of this shit. Really? And actually, all my friends who are in that period of life where they're talking about potential HRT, it's been really interesting. So many of them have encountered quite a lot of ignorance in the medical profession because of this study. And this is something that OpenEvidence has been sending to people inquiring on the value of HRT. So what are your thoughts, George? I'll calm down for a second.
You're a very valid point there, Louise. Like I said, I do use OpenEvidence quite a bit. It's quite a cool tool. And you're right, it is very much a ChatGPT for doctors, but it uses peer-reviewed evidence-based data as its backend, and it provides you with the references. And it's backed by the New England Journal of Medicine and the Journal of the American Medical Association, two very highly respected journals. I used to really, really love it until about a week or two ago. I actually typed in some of my own symptoms and my health concerns or whatever, and it came back with a report saying, in elderly men, we recommend the... and I sort of went, oh, okay, well, there's obviously a problem there somewhere. So, from the use I've had, and I've found it quite good, and it is based on a strong background of data. But again, this just highlights how important it is for AI tools to have good data behind them, because, if you analyze bad data, you get bad results. And obviously this come up in this respect. I'll say upfront, I am by no means an expert in HRT, and I have been sort of following the debate, and the debate has been swinging and swaying over the years. And there are conflicting guidelines. I did a little bit of a deep into the dive into data. I didn't use OpenEvidence. I used good old PubMed to try and find some data. And there are some conflicting reports out there that some of the old HRT combinations did have some negative correlations with cancer incidence. Again, yeah, this is that challenge of cause versus causation. So it's challenging, but unfortunately, bias is still prevalent in basically all the data we have. So the fact that we discussed earlier, the UK Biobank, the bigger the sample, hopefully that enables us to filter out some of the bias, but having a closed LLM that is based around evidence is probably a benefit, but doesn't solve all the problems. Media Online, a couple of years ago when I was in Barcelona, they actually ran a panel session on the issue of biases in clinical research data between men and women. And there were some stark examples there where data that was not tested on women was being used to treat women. So we need to really think about that. And personalization is becoming more and more possible in healthcare now.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. But then also just looking at this fast adoption by doctors, when you read the business, let's say, literature, then it's like, wow, huge success. The CEO is on the front cover of Forbes magazine because, so successful, which is from a business perspective. But just because doctors are using your product, that's probably as a result of really good business model and excellent marketing. Like, it's free and use it rather than...
Exactly. One thing I can vouch for is what doctors love more than free tools. And that's tools that pay them to use them.
Okay then.
Other than that, I will put hand on heart that we argue here that 40% of doctors use OpenEvidence. Probably another 40% use ChatGPT. When we have a lot of tools that are at our disposal, I don't think that the only tool they would use is OpenEvidence. Up to date, it's been one of the stalwarts of clinical decision-making for decades. We do want tools which make information available to us. If they're free, then there's really no impediment to us use them. We still have to make the clinical decision on what we're going to do with that information. The human has to stay in the loop.
Human has to trust the model as well, because trust, it's so hard to earn, but very easy to lose. So, they would only need a couple of bad examples that got a lot of press before people would think twice about using them, even if the business model is a good one for doctors.
And we have seen $3.5 billion companies go to zero in the past as well. So just because someone is valued at $3.5 billion, considering their income is probably very limited, I'm not a big fan of these huge valuations and what they really mean.
No, that's right. They're just so common. Interestingly, we are seeing increasingly, though, that AI is changing the ways that doctors and, all clinicians access medical knowledge. And we'll be continuing to talk about this topic, George, because I think it's just going to come up again and again.
So hard to keep up with. Every week there's a new article which comes out which breaks the paradigm. The model is changing so rapidly, and we kept on talking about 17 years for adoption of new ideas in healthcare. Now we're almost getting to 17 minutes. It's getting frightening how quickly it's all happening.
Yes, and actually I'll give a plug. On the 7th of August, I'm doing a webinar with Pulse IT. So we've got a Pulse IT webinar with Philip Stally-Gordon and I. It's Philip's from Daedalus. He and I are going to be chatting about equitable AI by design. So we're going to be looking at bias and how, as a developer, yes, but more towards clinician users and clinician researchers. How do you make sure that the algorithms that you're building and or using that have been built by others are bias-free as much as possible, or biased only in the way you want it to be? And there is a way that these things are supposed to be biased, but tune in for that, anyone who's interested. That's on the 7th of August.
I will be tuning in from a Greek beach with my iced coffee in hand, looking forward to it. Yeah, look, I think it's a really important topic. It's actually in my diary, and I think it's going to be like 6 o'clock in the morning over there, but I will be there.
If you register, George, you'll get sent a link. You can watch the recording.
I want to be there live.
Okay. Well, great. All right. Now to another hot topic. We, not surprisingly, continue to see more stories on the use of AI, but we're starting to now see the use of AI in pretty much everyday healthcare. And a couple of examples from Australia caught my eye. So in South Australia, aged care provider ECH is using an AI assistant. What are they using it for? Care plans. They found it drastically reduced time to create the plans, apparently from 20 minutes to 36 seconds. And the accuracy of the information in them went from 35.3% to 92.5%. I have questions for you about that, George, but I'll just tell you what the other story that caught my eye is. As reported in Pulse IT, in Victoria, Monash Health, they're about to go to tender, and what they're looking for is an integrated AI clinical coding tool. And from those advanced tender documents, Monash is expecting AI to be able to improve financial outcomes for the health service by increasing the efficiency of coding and reducing coding error rates. And I also noted that in their advanced tender document, they said they plan to mitigate future workforce pressures by offsetting the need for additional coding resources as demand grows. So, George, what do you think about these couple of examples of, everyday healthcare doing what they can and adopting these new tools and making the most of them?
I think it's great that we've actually seen more organizations doing things with AI and publishing the results. I think that's a really good thing. And the fact that they're talking about what they're doing and sharing their experiences. And ECH is a good example. They've always been one of the pace setters in innovation in aged care, and I've known them for many, many years, and they've done quite a few interesting things. And their recent case study on care plans is a great example of how they can utilize AI to improve what is normally a tedious process. Now, first of all, whilst the 20-minute to 30-second shift sounds amazing, you do have to put that into context. You don't do care plans.
That can't be accurate, surely.
And even if it is, you do care plans, every 6 months or every year or something on a person. So the 19-minute saving over a 6-month period probably isn't going to significantly, change their bottom line. The question about the accuracy and complexity, that's something I want to dig into. And I'm going to put a call out to my friends at ECH because they have presented a number of times at the ITAC conference, which I chair. If this is as good as you say it is, present it at ITAC and present it in front of the peers and open up some discussion around it. But, again, the care plans are an important part of aged care. One of the problems with care plans in aged care is that the person doing them may not have access to all the right information at their fingertips. They need access from clinical team. They need access from the home care provider team. They need access from the physios and the OTs. So, being able to bring all that together and using templates and guidelines. So to what degree these are innovative care plans or just well-structured care plans. The fact that they're well-structured in themselves is a benefit because that makes it easier for people to utilize them. So I think it's a great incentive. I'll do a call out. There's a guy on LinkedIn called George Gazunas who actually runs an AI in aged care newsletter looking at new examples of how AI is used in aged care. I'll send you the link, Louise. We can put it, share it in the notes. It's a free newsletter. He presented at this year's ITAC and I was really quite impressed in that he comes from a technology background, but he's dug very deeply into the sector. So we are looking for more and more solutions. We keep on saying AI is the answer. We're finding more and more of those solutions are coming into play. The Department of Health and Aged Care now has a Director of Innovation in place who's very keen at looking at AI. We're now in that next phase where we've gone through a lot of the hype and we've had some spectacular failures and some spectacular successes. We're now starting to use it in run-of-the-mill day-to-day procedures. The number of AI tools out there is just, asymptotically growing. So I think we still need to get our heads around which is the right tools to use. But I think ECH is a great example, and the fact that they've come out and spoken about it is great. The Monash example, we do know the people at Monash quite well. We know they're actually some of the most innovative people in our game. Coding is a great example. It's a task which is usually done by someone in the basement, laboriously going over lots and lots of pieces of paper looking for things that will enable into coding. And it's a real,
And it's a real skill. Yeah, go to uni to study it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember when I worked in the private hospital space, the coders were worth as much as the best surgeons in the hospital because a good coder can actually increase the revenue. And that's very important in the hospital space. Now, of course, if all you do is use AI to increase revenue for private hospitals, I think some of the payers may be a bit upset about that. So they'll probably start using AI to try and find faults in the AI used by the coders to reduce them. So I don't want to get into this payers versus providers payment battle and AI versus AI, but looking at big realms of data where that's always been a limitation. How do we access, what do we do with all the information we have available? Coding is an example. What I've been hearing about, two of my sons are engineers and we're talking about how much they now use AI in actual computer coding. I mean, yeah, gone are the days where you needed to be a whiz-bang coder to develop solutions. They really throw things at AI, and some of the code that comes out, they said, is as good as what they've ever been able to write themselves. So I think there's, again, we're going to have that issue about jobs being replaced by AI and how we fill in the gaps around it. That's going to be an interesting time for us all.
Yes, we will. Right. Yes. Well, good on you, Monash, and good on you, ECH. Look forward to hearing more about your developments. Well, it's time for a quick break. And when we return, we have a real treat for you guys. Dr. Danny Sands, pioneer of participatory medicine, is joining us from Boston. Now, George and I chatted with Danny the other day. We had such a great chat with him that we've decided to bring you part one of our chat with Dr. Danny Sands today. And part two will be in the next episode. Today on Pulse, we're joined by Dr. Danny Sands, one of the true pioneers of patient-centred care and digital health. Dr. Sands is a primary care physician, health IT innovator, and co-founder and chair emeritus of the Society for Participatory Medicine, a leading voice in the movement to empower patients as active partners in their own care. Throughout his career, Danny has been at the forefront of using technology to improve the doctor-patient relationship long before it was cool. And as you'll probably hear, I'm sure we will talk about it today, I think he and ePatient Dave has pretty much done a lot of work to make it cool. Well, from building one of the first electronic health records at Beth Israel Deaconess to championing secure patient portals at a time when people thought it was risky to let patients see their own notes, Danny has always pushed for healthcare that's more transparent, inclusive, and of course, human. He continues to advise digital health companies, teaches at Harvard Medical School, and most importantly, he practices what he preaches as a compassionate physician who believes the best outcomes come from shared decision-making. Danny, it is so wonderful to have you here. Welcome to the Pulse Pod studio.
It's awesome to be with you guys.
It is great to catch up with you virtually again, Danny.
I know, it's been too long.
All right. Our next interview, we will make sure we do it in person. And we have to get you out to Australia, Danny. You're okay with that?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, then.
Down Under is one of my favorite places to visit.
Brilliant. Now, Danny, I was thinking about when I first met you, and I'm pretty sure, if my memory serves me right, it was in 2007. You were visiting Australia for the MedInfo conference. And I can't remember the restaurant. I knew there were other people there, but there was only a few of us, maybe 4 or 5. George, I'm not sure, you might have been there, but I remember Danny. And the reason I remember meeting you so much, Danny, is you had a BlackBerry, which at the time was 2007. I was like, that is so cool. Anyway, this is before the days of the iPhone kiddies. So Danny had a BlackBerry and he excused himself for a moment and looked at the BlackBerry. I was like, oh, what are you doing? And he was typing an email to a patient. And I was just blown away that you were emailing a patient personally. And it was like no big deal. Like you do it all the time. And I'd never seen, and still to this day, I have never seen a clinician do that. So could you share a bit about your background and when did you first start thinking about how you could use technology to enable the care that you provide?
Yeah, so I have to go back a little bit to understand how I got there. And so, Louise, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I had this technology stuff that I was already working on. This is like when I was in high school, and I was really interested in technology. I think I had kind of an interest in healthcare too, but I had to sort of pick what I wanted to do. So I went off to college and explored both a field of engineering I was interested in and healthcare and medicine. And in the end, I chose medicine. But throughout my training, I became frustrated that we were not taking advantage of technology to take better care of patients. So I thought it was ridiculous that professors or attending physicians, as we call them, would say, Danny Sands, so tell me this patient got admitted because she had syncope, she fainted. And can you name 10 of the 50 known causes of syncope? Or, Mrs. Jones was admitted and she had a potassium that was low. What was her potassium? And what was it 2 weeks ago when she had another blood test? And I'm sitting there thinking, why are you asking me to recall this stuff? It makes no sense. Computers are much better at that kind of work. So I really had to do some soul searching, and I really was maybe going to leave medicine altogether. But what happened is that I realized there was this burgeoning field called medical informatics. And so I sought out training in this field, and I did training at Beth Israel in Boston and Harvard Medical School. And I was able to train on how to create tools for clinicians to empower them to take better care of patients. So that's what I was doing after my medical training, my residency training.
And when you found that those courses and the people, I guess, that went along, like, did you feel like this is it for me? Like, I can be a doctor now?
Yes, I felt like I was home. The particular program that I was in was focused on building real world solutions, not on doing like science experiments that only a few people would ever see. And for example, the first project that I did as a fellow is I programmed a system to help physicians make better decisions. As soon as this was approved, it went live for thousands of users immediately. And my metric of success was whether people found this, because I wasn't allowed to tell them about it, whether they found it, whether they used it, and whether the usage went up over time. So it was the virality of it.
Cool. When was that? Roughly what year was that?
That was in, I can tell you, give me 1 second. That would have been in 1992, I believe.
Cool. So before the dawn of the internet.
Yes, definitely. Before there was a word as viral as applied to technology. So one of the things that I was developing was our electronic health record. I was working with a team to develop that health record you mentioned that was in use here in regular use for hundreds of practices and thousands of doctors in use until last June, if you can believe that, all the way from back then until now. But at any rate, I was developing these tools to empower clinicians to take better care of patients. And I was also seeing patients at the same time. So once or twice a week, I'd see patients in my primary care clinic. And one of the things that happened sort of organically from this, I said, wait a minute, these tools are really equally empowering to patients and family caregivers. So the first thing that I did, and this is pre-web, mind you, is I started sharing my email address with some of my patients.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Oh my God. My colleagues thought I was totally nuts. And yet I found this was just incredible. Patients loved this, right? They loved it, as you can imagine. And I found it was empowering too for different reasons. I could time shift. I could satisfy them without taking office time for things that didn't need to be taken care of in the office. So many reasons this was great. And so over time and through trial and error, I developed a set of rules, guidelines on how to do this effectively. And then in 1998, I co-authored the very first guidelines on how to do this effectively. And this is still in the early days of the web.
We're going to have to put a link to those in the show notes.
Sure.
Because still, I've never had a clinician say, email me. A doctor. Allied Health, yes. But no, I've never been able to email a doctor. So yeah, I love that those guidelines were done then, Danny. That's very cool.
So then I sort of had these two pieces of my career, my interests, which is one is empowering clinicians with these technologies. The other was empowering patients and families. And that when the web burst on the scene, then of course, even more people had access to email, but also I was prescribing websites to patients. I prescribed, you mentioned ePatient Dave earlier. I don't know if all your audience knows who that is.
Yes, he's been on the show.
He's been on, okay.
I'll just give a shout out then. If someone is new to our podcast, go back in the archives and you will see that we spoke to ePatient Dave last year. So anyway, but go on, Danny.
So when Dave was diagnosed with metastatic cancer, the story we share is how technology changed that experience. And one of the things that happened is that I prescribed an online support community to him. And he credits that, and his oncologist credits that, with saving his life, because it allowed him to get the care he needed and to understand how to tolerate that at higher doses than he would have normally. And he's well today. He's very healthy today. So that's really how it all evolved. And that led to my creating one of the nation's first patient portals at our institution, which went live such a very long time ago. I can't even believe it, 25 years ago. So that's really how this all evolved. And that's where the passion comes from. And then it was later when I was working at Cisco, I was allowed to spend part of my time making a difference in our industries. And I co-founded with a bunch of other people who were trying to understand how technology empowered patients. And we eventually created a nonprofit called the Society for Participatory Medicine.
I actually first met you, I think it was 2003 when you came over for HIC, when Joan Edgecombe was running HIC back in the days. I think that was the very first time I got to meet you. And then in 2004, Yeah, I remember that. And then 2004, when we came over to San Francisco for MedInfo, you introduced me back then to Dr. Tom Ferguson, who was the original and unfortunately passed away a few years after that. So, been following the journey for a long time. And the thing is, everyone's been saying that I've been doing this for a long time, but Danny's been doing it longer. I just like to point it out. So that makes him the great grandfather of our digital health. And the journey's been amazing because, like I said, one of the advantages you have over there in the United States that we didn't have here in Australia back in those days was the ability to do both things together. The clinical informatics back in the early 2000s, late 1990s in Australia was an unknown profession. Whilst I was working as a hospitalist, I had to leave hospital practice to go into digital health because you just couldn't do both. What you've done is amazing. And so for any of the young people listening, there's opportunities for success. But I think the big thing, and you were at Cisco the same time I was at Intel, and we did a lot of collaborative work together then, but the Society for Participatory Medicine was that groundbreaking step. It changed it from, let's be honest, a bunch of nerds sitting in the corner who used to love doing this stuff to turning it into a full-blown society where we integrated clinicians, technology, patients, policymakers all into the discussion. What was your experience for that? I mean, that was a big deal. Participatory medicine didn't even exist as a term back in 2009, and now it's one of the 4 Ps that we keep on talking about. How was that process of developing that society, and how's it gone since then?
So the origin story there, George, is that Tom Ferguson was a doctor who never practiced medicine. He instead wanted to democratize medicine. And he wanted patients to understand more about what medicine is and what healthcare is and how to take care of themselves. He came of age in the 60s. He was the medical editor of the Whole Earth catalog at one point. He published a magazine called Medical Self-Care back in the 70s, which is just incredible. And so he became a sort of an anthropologist observing what's happening in healthcare. And then when the web burst on the scene, then he just got on fire because then he realized, oh my God, there are all these opportunities. And he realized before many of us that these technologies allow patients to connect to information and to each other and to healthcare professionals. So really, really remarkable. And Tom started accumulating people. He collected people and ideas. And so he brought together people who were doing novel, pioneering things in the industry. And he didn't care if they were doctors or patients or researchers or whatever it was. And we would get together for a weekend and just share ideas and ideate. And it was a wonderful, rich session. We'd share things we were reading, things we were doing, and cool tools and all kinds of things. It was just a really special time. And one of the things that Tom did is he wrote a paper, which is now on our website, about e-patients, where the E is not electronic, but it's patients who are engaged, educated, enlightened, and empowered. So it was about e-patients, and it was a bunch of case studies in this white paper. Sadly, he passed away before the paper was finished, and we, the people he had brought together, finished this paper. So he passed away in 2006. So after Tom died, we kept meeting year after year, and we came to the realization that we couldn't just keep talking about this amongst ourselves, right? We needed to make a difference. In our own way, we were trying to make a difference, but we really wanted to make the healthcare system different. We already had a blog that we were doing, and we decided in quick succession to create a journal of participatory medicine, which still exists today. It's published by JMIR, J-M-I-R, and we can put a link in the show notes, I'm sure. So we created a journal, and then we wanted to create an organization. And we had to come up with a name for the organization, of course. And we discussed a lot of ideas. And Gilles Friedman, who was one of the pioneers in online patient support communities, Gilles Friedman came up with this idea that this is participatory medicine. And then, of course, it's an interesting conversation, which is that, well, why do we name it? So participatory, you get, but then why is it medicine as opposed to healthcare? And why is it a society? All these things come up. And at the time, we realized that we're not going to change healthcare by being a bunch of angry patients pushing on the healthcare system and trying to get it to change. I mean, those of us who've worked in health understand that it's hard to get this system to change. And it's true in Australia as it is in the United States. So what we needed to really do is try to change it from the inside as well. So we needed people involved in this movement who are in healthcare, not just patients. In other words, healthcare professionals, healthcare executives, what have you. So we wanted to appeal to the professionals as well. So that's why we called it a society. And then the medicine part of it, the reason it was medicine, not healthcare, is because medical doctors are the biggest problem in many ways. They have been most resistant to a lot of this. Nurses sort of have understood this earlier. So that's a generalization, of course. Not all doctors are like that and all nurses are like that. But that's why it got its name, Society for Participatory Medicine.
Excellent. And for anyone under the age of 60, the Whole Earth Catalog was the Bible of the hippies back in the 60s. I remember reading it when I was at high school going, wow, that's spaced out, man. But it's interesting that that's the sort of route you needed to take to develop change in this sector.
Exactly. And I think you need a link to the Wikipedia entry for that in your show notes as well.
These show notes are going to be quite extensive, I imagine, today. Not a problem.
Well, we can publish them in the journal.
There we go. Well, actually, speaking of journals, and you have published, you've got a long publishing record, Danny, but one of the things I wanted to raise today was your recent paper, which is entitled From Internet to Artificial Intelligence, AI Bots, Symbiotic Evolutions of Digital Technologies and E-Patients. And in that paper, you reference those three triad words for e-patients, that engaged, equipped, and empowered that you mentioned. So for those, we will put a link to your paper in the show notes. But for those listening who haven't read it yet, can you tell us a bit about how this paper came about and what's changing when it comes to this AI business and e-patients?
So the genesis of the paper, honestly, was that the initial incarnation was that it was a look back on all kinds of technologies as they've evolved over the years. But when I really looked at this, I said, well, wait a minute. What's really interesting is that as these technologies have evolved, e-patients have taken advantage of these technologies at every stage of development. And then they've sort of pushed the industry to innovate more and come up with the next generation of these technologies. So in the paper, I talk about this symbiotic evolution of these technologies. And so we have the technologies growing. At the same time, the e-patient movement is growing, because the e-patient movement, yes, it kind of has its roots back when Tom Ferguson was doing stuff in the 70s, but it really took off, at the dawn of some of these technology evolutions. And in fact, in the paper, we talk about some very old technologies. So that's what's, I think, the interesting story about this. And we can see how this evolution, this co-evolution has occurred. And we also sort of project forward about where things are going.
So following on from that, obviously one of the big changes through that journey has been the evolution of the availability of information to those patients. So I remember, when you and I went to med school, medical journals were sacrosanct, only available through the medical library, and you had to basically have a white coat and a stethoscope to enter that room to be able to access them. 20 years later, we now had access online to medical journals, but now AI is taking it a whole next step. And tools like OpenEvidence and even just the classic ChatGPT tools give patients access to so much more information than what they've ever had to. What does that mean for that relationship between the physician, the doctor, and the patient? We often put the blame on the doctor for being the one who's shielded patients from the information. Now that we are on the same information platform, what does that relationship look like? What does that ideally look like to you as a clinician? And from a patient's perspective, how do we make this a symbiotic relationship, not an antagonistic relationship?
Yeah, George, you bring up a really, really interesting point, which is that the traditional model of healthcare historically has been one of information asymmetry. And that's a term from warfare and from economics. But it means that one person has the information, the other person doesn't have the information. And the party who has the information uses that to their advantage. Now, in healthcare, the way that has been manifested is that doctors could feel proud that they knew everything and the patient knows nothing. So the poor patient could come and say, oh, you told me I have this disease, doctor. Would you please tell me a little bit about that disease? And that is this horrible kind of asymmetry that is something that unfortunately many physicians have felt comfortable with over the years. That is, that we've sort of assumed the role of know-it-all. In fact, the word doctor is from the Latin, I believe, docere, which means to teach. And yes, we should be teachers, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't share our information, right? And so I argue that that model, besides being broken, is uncomfortable. And here's the reason. When I talk to groups of physicians, and I've been doing this for a long time now, I talk to a group of physicians and I ask them, how many of you know everything there is to know about your field of medicine? And everybody just laughs because they realize there's no way they can know that, right? And yet, many of these same doctors in front of patients, they want to act like they know everything, that they are the know-it-all, they are the font of information. So people are kind of living a lie. If they act like they know everything, they really know they don't know everything. It's living a lie. That's all it is. It's uncomfortable. So I think that living a lie is going to be uncomfortable. So this is impractical now because, as you pointed out, George, we have now democratization of information. All this information is out there. As you point out, and, as you said, we've been through the ringer. We've been here enough time. We remember when you could buy medical textbooks like Gray's Anatomy at your local bookstore. Now, of course, nobody goes to bookstores anymore, but this information is available online. As websites have been out there, okay, all this information is online. And then the National Library of Medicine, the US, has made the world's medical literature available to anybody, right? Anybody. So thinking that my knowledge is special is just ridiculous. So we can move to a model of information symmetry where patients and clinicians can be more partners. We're sharing the same information base. We have the same access to the same knowledge. It's how we interpret that, how we use it, that makes a difference. And rather than feeling uncomfortable now with this, I think physicians should feel liberated by this because they don't have to live the lie anymore and they can be honest. And in fact, one of the things I think is really important is to admit to yourself that you don't know everything. And then secondly, admit to your patients, look, I don't know. When a patient asks you something and you don't know the answer, don't pretend you don't hear them. Don't ignore it. Don't walk out of the office. Don't do that. Just say, you know what? That's a good question. I don't know. And then once you get good at that, move on to the next step, which is say, let's look it up together and just spend a little bit of time in the office looking that up. That's very powerful. So we need to embrace this information symmetry. And then to the second part of your question was, what happens to the relationship? Well, I think that's a foundation for a more honest relationship. In any relationship, you need to be honest with what your own limitations are, right? And so we need to be honest there. And then what happens is the value of the doctor changes. The value of that healthcare professional changes because I'm not just the source of knowledge. I don't have to just find information and know where that is. Now, my value is that I can help you through your illness. And I'm going to offer judgment and my perspectives. But we're starting from a higher point. So just to use a metaphor of your family, if you can have a conversation with your 2-year-old, but your 2-year-old doesn't have a great knowledge base, right? So your conversations are kind of limited, kind of shallow, right? All right, we got that. But at the time that your kids become 16-year-olds, if they're still talking to you, they have much more knowledge and experience, and then you can have a much higher level of conversation. So what happens here in the medical relationship is that, wow, we can have a much more powerful and nuanced conversation when patients come to the visit informed and they take advantage of that information symmetry.
I do love going back to 2013, the book you wrote with e-patient Dave, where you actually, the cover, the two of you are both looking at the same screen, which is something revolutionary in those days. I remember when we first started using computers here, we used to actually try to hide the screen from the patient so they wouldn't see what we were entering into it. So that in itself was a big step forward.
And that's still all too common, George. I think, figuring out how to do that EHR etiquette, as I call it, is really important skill for our physicians to learn. As I said, I deal with residents here, and one of the hardest things for them to do is turn the screen a little bit so the patient can see the screen, see what you're doing there.
George, how long could we have talked to Danny Sands for? Like 3 hours? Easily.
I'll tell you what, yeah. I got up early to join the call. I had some technical issues, but I worked my way through them because it was such a fascinating discussion. Now, I've known Danny for over 20 years now. And first of all, I still can't believe he looks younger than what he looked 20 years ago. So I don't know what that's saying. Whatever he's doing, I want to bottle it. The breadth of knowledge and his willingness to share is just amazing.
Yeah, no, he's such a lovely man. So we'll look forward to bringing you part 2, Pulse Potties, in the next show. But yeah, thank you, Danny, for joining us. It was awesome. George, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Australian Alliance for Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare. Now, for those of you who don't know this group, you would know their work because they've released the first AI in Healthcare roadmap back in 2021, but they're now working on their third roadmap. So as part of their consultation, the Alliance has a survey and they're seeking your feedback into key national policy recommendations to support safe, scalable and effective AI implementation across healthcare. Now, I'll put the link in the show notes and I encourage listeners to share your thoughts and help shape the national AI agenda. So please take the time to do that.
Yep, highly recommend that because the work that they've done has put us at the forefront and enabled healthcare AI to be a major player in the AI discussions here in Australia.
Yes. Enrico Cuera and everyone else that's behind that. Amazing. And of course, that alliance has been around since before everyone was talking about AI.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So the other announcement, George, as you know, but I wanted to let listeners know that my dad died last week. I've talked about him a number of times over the last year, especially sharing stories of his journey in the healthcare system and information access. So I wanted to let everyone know that he is no longer with us. I didn't want to say before what was wrong with Dad. There was actually quite a long list. Mum would say he's a miracle man that he survived for so long, but he had a rare and aggressive cancer. And by the time he saw a doctor, and my dad did always say when it came to going to the doctor, you don't go looking for trouble. By the time he actually thought, oh, what's this massive big lump growing out of my shoulder? It was too late. It was already stage 4. And because of other health conditions, they couldn't treat it at all. But he had actually a really great last year. He was diagnosed over a year ago. He wasn't supposed to make Christmas, but he did. Most of you know, my dog Ripley has been living with Dad since October, and she was a temporary loan because, again, he wasn't supposed to make it until Christmas. Well, Ripley's been with Dad for 11 months over there and keeping him company. And he had a really lovely death as far as these things go. So he's very stubborn, my dad, but he didn't want oxygen for his COPD, didn't want to take morphine, even when Mum was like, they've given you these medicine, why don't you take some of it? That'll probably help. And he, 2 days before he died, he was saying to Mum he wasn't taking the drugs because he didn't want to get addicted, which was hilarious because what do you think happened, Dad? Take the drugs, it's fine. Well, we promise we won't send you to rehab. But anyway, wouldn't take the drugs and he wasn't in any pain and he wasn't distressed. And he was at home pretty much until the end. I did miss saying goodbye, which was a bit sad, but we knew that was a risk when you live far away. And the man only spent 5 hours in palliative care. So by the time it had gotten to the stage where Mum and my sister was like, yep, he does need to now go into hospital, into palliative care, he was only in palliative care for 5 hours. We were on a plane, but it couldn't quite make it in time. But my sister described his death and he really did. He took a last breath and that was it. Wasn't out of his mind with morphine or anything. And so I just wanted to let people know, and my dad was a Vietnam veteran and he spent significant time in Vietnam as the lead machine gunner. And he really taught my sisters and I the value of having a strong work ethic, hence why I'm still doing this podcast, but I thought I'd leave this bit to the end. So value of a strong work ethic, that man knew how to work, and the value of loyalty and, of course, putting others above yourself is really what my dad did throughout his entire life. So bye, Curly, and we're going to miss you.
So, Louise, I never had the opportunity to meet your father, but the discussions we've had over the last year or so about him, I feel like I've gotten to know him personally, and he just sounds like an amazing guy. Look, on behalf of all the listeners, I'm sure I can say this on behalf of all our listeners, you have all our condolences for you and your family. And whilst, it's tragic that you've lost your father, his last 11 months have been amazing. They've been real examples of how people's spirit and willingness to live, and again, there is no silver bullet, no genomic test, no wearable that would have solved this problem. This is part of that what the Lion King calls the circle of life. But the fact that he had a loving family around him, I think, is critical. And like I said, you probably gave him an extra couple of months by loaning him your dog. So you played a very active part in his health maintenance, Louise. And the fact that he spent 5 hours in palliative care really demonstrates that the healthcare system, its components, when they're used properly, can actually have some benefits. So in Greece, we have a saying, may their memory be eternal. I hope his memory will linger on. And the fact, like you said, he's from a Vietnam vet and from the very, very first baby boomers. He was born in 1945, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Yep.
Yeah, so he's the very first bunch of baby boomers who are now going through this cycle. And yeah, there's a big chunk of us to going through that phase. I hope we can all sort of, learn from his experience. So condolences, his memory be eternal. And the big question now, of course, is really when I want to come home.
I know, yes.
That's one very spoiled dog I heard over there.
She is. When I was over there, she's got a few bad habits, I must say, begging for food. And I had to let her know, look, I'm sorry, but the good times are over. That was Grandpa. And, now you're going to go back on a diet. And it was actually really sweet when the ambulance came to actually take Dad out of home. My mum actually made sure that Ripley was there with my dad and watched him, and was with him. And apparently just as my dad was getting lifted off the ground on the stretcher, he did reach out and patted the dog and said goodbye. And so she seemed to be okay, the dog. So yes, Ripley will be coming back, but yes, she will find it's an adjustment from all the treats. Grandpa used to give her a jelly bean before bed. So yeah, no more jelly beans for Ripley.
Ripley may be looking at you sort of going, oh, I want the other guy back.
Yeah, Grandpa was much better than you. Oh, well, thank you for those lovely words, George. Thanks. I almost got through that without crying, so I'm pleased. Anyway, okay, well, time to make the show come to a close. If you could please read us out. Thanks, George.
Thank you all for listening to Pulse, brought to you by Pulse IT News. Pulse is produced by Ivan Jurek of Octopod Productions. Big thanks to everyone for listening. Make sure you subscribe, follow and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, you can visit pulseit.news to sign up for the e-newsletter and explore Pulse IT's massive digital archive. Send any feedback or topic suggestions to pulsepod@pulseit.news. We'd love to hear from what's on your mind. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.